The Hungarian elections are good news, but Central Europe doesn't change overnight after one election. Euroscepticism hasn't gone anywhere, and the next electoral cycle is already around the corner. What is really happening in the region and what to do about it? That's what our first panel discussion here to discuss. Good neighborhood lines in Central Europe. What's next after the Hungarian elections and before the next ones in the region? Welcome our speakers to the stage. Oana Popescu Zamfir, Director at GlobalFocus Center, Romania. Balázs Jarábik, founder of Minority Report Consulting, Slovakia. András Rácz, Senior Research Fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations, Hungary. Yevhen Hlibovytskyy, CEO of the Frontier Institute, Ukraine. Moderator, Dmytro Tuzhanskyi, head of the Patronage Service Unit in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. And our commentators, Ábel Ravasz, Emeritus President at the Matthias Bell Institute, Slovakia, and Csilla Fedinec, Senior Research Fellow, Center for Social Sciences, Hungary. Welcome.
Okay. Oh, yeah, right now. Hello to everyone, and thank you, Rosanna, for such a warm and detailed introduction. You saved my time because I know everybody, but having, let's say, soulmates in one panel, I'm a bit confused to mix your very nice titles, and I could actually tell the very private and very individual story about each of our brilliant speakers. This panel will be in English, so please, if you need the translation, there is an equipment there. Please join us. And additionally, I have timer here. We have 1 hour and 20 minutes. I really plan to ask you to ask questions in the very end, so please be ready. Our panel is dedicated to good neighborliness in Central Europe, and I will, bear with me a bit. I will do a little bit introduction, and then we'll exactly ask questions. So this is the topic, which is the foundation of modern Europe, because the EU as a project is built and was built through reconciliation and through agreement between mainly and firstly Germany and France. Schuman Plan was done, and actually we could talk about 4 freedoms, about economics and EU accession, enlargement, etc., but the foundation of the EU is exactly a good neighborliness. In case of Ukraine, it's another perspective, additional one, because since 2014, one of our neighbor is a key threat to Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and this is a dilemma, how to build this good neighborliness, because as of now, already for more than 10 years, and we don't know the perspective, we could talk about really good neighborliness only in the western direction, or for example, south direction. Let's see about north, but still, this is the Ukraine perspective. And within the nearest calendar, and looking also to the back, we have a very controversial context. Yeah, the Hungarian election was mentioned, but it's not only about Hungary when we are talking about challenges of the building good neighborliness relations. And in the future, for example, in next year, the elections in Poland and Slovakia, they are scheduled. Let's see what will be in Romania. So we I don't know, thought that we passed already the election turbulence in the previous years when there were 4 elections actually in a very, very intense thing. But here we are. So I will start from the very blitz format. Please, could you identify what is the good neighborliness as an approach within your strategic culture and national interest of your country, I mean. Very short, 1 sentence, 2. What is the key element of building this good neighborliness? And Oana, the floor is yours, starting from you, and then the next, please.
Hello, and thank you very much, Dmytro, for the invitation. It's always humbling being here, and I think when we say Central Europe, this is not just geographically the center of everything. I think Ukraine is becoming central to literally everything in a geopolitical sense as well. I mean, you really want 1, 2 sentences from me. That's going to be difficult because nothing is easy in this region. But I will say the following with in relation to Romania. I mean, from where we stand, we feel the war. We see the war, as you know, every day. We host Ukrainian refugees, and that was the moment. And it's significant to this idea of good neighborliness that I think we actually genuinely internalized the fact that Ukraine is a neighbor country and that the border is so close, despite the fact that it felt so far. Because for a while in our history, we were not necessarily the best of neighbors. And this was on the one hand for various geopolitical bilateral reasons, as I think is the case throughout this region that has already been described as a patchwork of very, very different interests, countries, and so on. But it's also as a matter of strategic culture, because Romania has a bit of a peculiar position in the region. We were not part of the V4 format, for instance. I don't think we feel a Central European identity. I think to us as a narrative, as an identity building narrative, it's always been very important to emphasize our Latin origin and which brought us closer to Western Europe. So I think in a way we tried to extract ourselves from this region that we were perceiving as part of the former communist bloc, part of what leads to conflict, tension, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, on the one hand, because we've always had this perception that many of our borders have been changed throughout time, that we have had our share of conflict in this region. It's always been one of the driving principles of Romania's foreign policy to have peaceful relations with neighbors. I don't think we have managed to achieve good relations, but I think we have achieved peaceful relations. With Hungary, that we have grievances with when it comes to national minority rights, with Serbia, where we have similar issues, with Ukraine, with which we have similar issues. So despite the fact that we share these ongoing tensions throughout history, I think we have managed to prioritize ways of deconflicting and of working together. What I think is particularly new now is that with the war and with Europe changing so much because of Ukraine, because of Russia's attack, I think we are finally learning to stop looking in the past and really not interested in letting history define our relations with neighbors. And I think as sad as it may be that we needed a war to do that, this really could be an opportunity to rebuild Central Eastern European identity and including the bilateral relationship between Romania and Ukraine on completely different grounds, looking to our strategic interests for the future, interest in EU and Euro-Atlantic integration, and After all, we have our shared challenges. The Americans just declassified documents looking into UFOs and extraterrestrial beings and found none. And yesterday everyone was joking in Romania, well, because the little green men, we have them all here in our region. They were seen in Estonia, they were seen in Ukraine, they have influenced our elections in Romania. So, you know, they're here, they're not there. Based on these shared challenges, I think there's a lot to build.
Thank you for this brilliant start. And yeah. Balázs, you are next. Please, you know, within the first question, I'm not going to interrupt you. That's why, yeah, it's still a blitz format, but go ahead. The Slovak perspective of good neighborliness.
Yes, 15 years ago, I was writing actually papers, academic papers about exactly under this term, good neighborliness. So it's good to be back into the same, different context, but in the same concept. So first of all, from a Slovak perspective, we are, you know, like I think Russia's war in Ukraine has become really a decisive, a tipping point, if you like. In 15 years, ever since I'm engaged into Ukraine, actually over 20, I try to explain that from a Slovak perspective, the country is kind of upside down from east to the west, also because the capital is in the west, but also because the focus in the past 30 years was EU integration for everyone. And, you know, as our current and that time former prime minister said very famously in 2019, well, there is nothing in the east. He meant east of eastern Slovakia, obviously. But when it comes to economy, investment, opportunities, and anything else, exactly this is the case. Just give you one data. Bratislava is around 180% of the EU average GDP. Prešov is at 46. So just to highlight how much the structural imbalances in this country is. Now the war, just exactly as I want to pick up where on the left, it creates a huge opportunity for this region. I mean, meaning Eastern Slovakia, you know, plugging Ukraine in and the EU integration now, the realistic opportunity or possibility, this has become an issue that finally the East has a new purpose. Just like, you know, 25, 30 years ago, Vienna was end of the West. Now it shouldn't be Prešov or Košice end of the West, but somewhere in the frontier, right, which is far away still from, very far away from us, thanks to Ukraine. So exactly this opportunity is coming back. I think both the previous government and the new government, I mean the Fico government, is seeing that. That's one of the reasons why, despite all the problems or issues or challenges, you name it, the government actually under Fico has become quite pragmatic and pushing through things, particularly infrastructure, which the previous government neglected. So my last point, there are two things, and essentially there are two resets with Slovakia, between Slovakia and Ukraine under his reign. So I think it's definitely positive, even though the relationship could have been much better and improve. And I think after the Hungarian elections, this is going to come. The other thing which I wanted to say is Ukraine's westward shift, which I have been focusing and writing a lot. You know, Ukraine has been pushed by the war toward westwards, by demography, by people, and, you know, infrastructure must follow, simply because of the recovery and reconstruction. You know, this Ukraine is de facto becoming part of the EU, not only by political processes, but simply by the impact of the war. And this is obviously creates, again, new opportunities. There are two major factors which we need to focus on, particularly from a Slovak perspective when it comes to pragmatical relations. One is the infrastructure connectivity, which is really lagging behind. We are at the very beginning of it. And usually infrastructure is following and lately political development, so it needs to be speed up. And the second, which is both an opportunity and an obstacle, is the energy relations. When it comes to Ukraine and Slovakia, this is what the Prime Minister is emphasizing, and I think it's going to be very keen on to moving forward. And my last thought, I also think that, for example, yes, as Oana mentioned, the Visegrad, I think it will be very hard to rebuild Visegrad, also because what to do with Ukraine, the new regional thinking and considerations will be very different. Russia's war has changed and essentially divided Visegrad. I don't think there is anyone from Poland, but Poland, it feels like part of Scandinavia now, not part of Visegrad. And I think the Polish-Hungarian relationship are going to be, again, special, but doesn't mean that Visegrad as such is going to be that much reinvigorated. And here comes the issue, what exactly, how Ukraine can be integrated simply. And for Zakarpattia, this is a key thing. Not much Poland or Romania, but Slovakia and Hungary going to be the key. And I think we have, after the Hungary elections, a new opportunity there. Thank you.
Thank you, Balázs. Yevhen, right now you, and just additional peek to your intervention, you mentioned already during the key speech about that Ukraine was or is not always satisfied with the reaction, the speed, the approach of its Western neighbors. But please answer within our approach to our good neighborliness. What and how we should work when it is vice versa. Very often our Western neighbors are also not, let's say, maybe not satisfied, but sometimes complain regarding our approach towards them.
Well, Ukraine is definitely a new kid on the block. And the problem with that is obviously the maturity of the political system, of the ability to form the message and send this message. In that sense, I think the Ukrainian society is way more mature than the Ukrainian institutions, and that's the unique thing about Ukraine. And the problem that we have, for instance, in relations with the EU, and I would also say in the relations with the neighbors, is that they're mostly institutional. So, on a human level, it's usually much better than it is on the institutional level. Let's be frank. Our neighborhood is not known for creating efficient institutions. This is something that we have to master. It's something that we have to work on. This is part of the homework that we're doing. Ukraine has not really asked the neighbors yet, how are we viewed in their eyes? Which is, I think, an important question. And partially Ukraine has not done this because Ukraine just recently asked itself how it views itself. So discovering Ukraine for many Ukrainians was a very unexpected encounter. And not only because the war makes state and state makes war paradigm, but also because of the unique trajectory that Ukraine was on. Just to think about it, basically the return from amnesia of the Soviet period, of the famine, of the aftermath of the Second World War, which was a very different experience than the experience for many other Central European countries. And as a result, recognizing trauma that's driving historical trauma that's driving Ukraine, but in a different sense that it's driving, for instance, Hungary or Poland. And people are alike in their happiness, but unique in their sorrow and suffering. And in that sense, I think what is important for all of us is to have certain, I'd say, to have certain level of tolerance towards each other. And I don't see that happening in bilaterals. I mean, I mostly see Ukrainian-Polish bilaterals, and I can tell you frankly that I'm sick and tired of discussions of history and political calculations on what will play which way. But what worries Ukraine was that with the Hungarian elections I say, one of those multiple recent elections, we were this close to having a realistic perspective of having the western border closed for Ukraine. And with export model of Ukrainian economy, this would be the end. And that pushed an understanding inside Ukraine that you cannot rely on Central Europe. And because you cannot rely on Central Europe, you have to look for partnerships elsewhere. And this is why NB8, Nordic Baltic 8, looks much more interesting from the Ukrainian perspective than any ghost of Visegrad, which I'm not sure whether it exists. And in that sense, I don't think that there is something to recover. I think there is a lot to build. And I remember 2 or 3 years ago, I was driving from Warsaw to Uzhhorod, and I drove through Slovakia. And the last hour and a half of driving through Slovakia, I felt like the earth is flat, and I'm gonna fall on one of the whales that the earth is located on, because it literally felt like the end of the world. And then you cross the Ukrainian border, and there's a festival there, you know, life, a lot of light, everything. And the thing is that being so disintegrated partially is Soviet legacy. Partially, it's always the mountains. But the question, the real question is, are we smart enough to overcome this? And the response that we get from the policy of the last 10, 15 years is not yet. So there's a lot to achieve. For me personally, the indicator is, are we going to have a Central European airport in Uzhhorod, which would extend into Slovakia? You know, are we going to have at least a symbolic project that will show how we're trying to connect, not disintegrate? And I think, with the, there are a lot of things that we simply don't know about each other. So, thinking about local Erasmus with the kids going around and getting to know each other, thinking about businesses having more commerce, thinking about improving infrastructure. We have the Austro-Hungarian railroad goes on the Ukrainian territory, then it goes 40 kilometers on the Romanian territory, and then back on Ukrainian territory. So from the Ukrainian perspective, it looks like there's lacking 40 kilometers of the railroad. On the Romanian territory, it looks like there's 40 kilometers of the railroad that goes from nowhere to nowhere. So we have to rethink all these projects. We have to rethink our priorities, and we owe it. We've borrowed already so much from our kids, and we're leaving them with such terrible debts and rescue agenda that they will have to do, that we owe it to them to leave also some legacy.
Thank you very much, András. Your time comes, and just to not help you, but precise your potential answer, we in Ukraine have already learned about Trianon trauma and the need of healing it and overcoming it as the fundamental part of good neighborliness of Hungary, its understanding. Could you still clarify, maybe name or describe few different schools in this regard, and also at what additionally is within this, let's say, national strategic culture of good neighborliness of Hungary, please?
Thank you, Dmytro. One compulsory kind of footnote. Everything I'm going to say here constitutes solely and explicitly my own personal opinion, so shall not be taken as the official position of either the German Council on Foreign Relations or of Hungary or any organization or state. Meaning, if anything goes wrong, it's literally András to blame, nobody else. Footnote number 1. Footnote number 2, or not even a footnote. First and foremost, I would like to say a thank you to the armed forces of Ukraine for guaranteeing a calm night. Because it's important. Many people think that Zakarpattia is safe from Russian airstrikes. You know it much better that it's not. The reason why Zakarpattia is safe is because the Ukrainian armed forces are protecting us. So that's my thank you here. And now, to answer your question about good neighborly relations and the Hungarian School of Strategic Thinking on that. Because of how the First World War ended, Hungary found itself as a country with national minorities living in all the neighboring countries. And after independence was regained in 1989, for every Hungarian government, the need to protect the rights of the minorities living in the neighboring countries has been one of the fundamental pillars of Hungarian foreign policy. These priorities were laid down by the first independent government of József Antal. It was called the triple priority of Hungarian foreign policy. First one, European integration, of course. The second one, good relations with the neighboring countries. And the third one, protecting the rights of the ethnic minorities living in the neighboring countries. And of course, all neighboring countries had different Hungarian minorities, different size, different legal status, different history. But these three fundamental priorities have always been there, and this is what the war has changed, and it changed it for the worse. And what Oana said, that the war was a catalyst for Romania. The full-scale war was also a catalyst for Hungary-Ukraine relations, but for the worse. The full-scale war in the last 4 years brought an earlier unseen deterioration of Hungary-Ukraine relations. There have been tensions about minority rights even before, but the full-scale war led to the escalation of these tensions because of the conscious policy of the government of Viktor Orban. And I give you a few examples. Hungary has had its tensions with the European Union even before, also inside NATO. But the full-scale war escalated these tensions, and the full-scale war made the Orban government take such decisions which actually started contradicting all the three priorities. In the last 4 years, you have seen decisions from the Hungarian government which weakened the European integration, a lot of vetoes, a lot of blocking. You've seen decisions which served the interest of nobody in Europe, but only of Russia. I give you an example. Delaying the NATO accession of Finland, and particularly Sweden, it was not good for Hungary at all. Hungary didn't even have demands from Sweden. Turkey was also delaying the Swedish and Finnish accession, but Turkey conducted rational policy. Turkey had certain political demands about which it was possible to negotiate. Hungary did not demand anything from Sweden. There was nothing to negotiate. The only player for whom this delay was good was actually Russia. Why? Because Russia was given extra time to adjust its military posture up in the north to prepare for the Swedish and Finnish NATO accession. And there have been a lot of such issues with the outgoing Orban government, or the Orban government, which already went out yesterday. So in the last 4 years, they made several such policy steps which contradicted European integration, contradicted good neighbor relations, and even contradicted the priority of protecting the rights of the Hungarian minorities abroad. I'll give you one example. The famous 11 points that Budapest demanded from Ukraine to protect the rights of the Hungarian minorities. The most critical or most problematic element of Ukraine's minor-related legislation about the educational rights In December 2023, Ukraine cancelled these most problematic elements of the law, driven by the need for European integration. So the most problematic element of the law, which actually never even came into force, yet still it was in the law, it was cancelled. So what happened thereafter? In early 2024, on a Hungary-Ukraine bilateral meeting, at the end, the Hungarian side literally handed over a piece of paper to the Ukrainian delegation that, oh yes, this is some extra 11 points that we demand. These 11 points were not coordinated in advance at all. This is not how you negotiate, colleagues. Before you publicly present something, you coordinate it in the background, you kind of coordinate positions, so when you go public with it, you already can start moving towards a solution. Hungary did exactly the opposite. One element of that 11 points, the last one, the last element was explicitly something that Ukraine could not fulfill as long as the war was going on. Why? Because Hungary demanded a modification of the Ukrainian constitution. And as you know it very well, as long as the war is going on, the constitution cannot be modified. Meaning, when Budapest started to demand that, Budapest knew it as well. If you start demanding something that you know that the other side cannot fulfill, no way, it means that you're not seeking an agreement, but you're seeking a conflict. And this has been characterizing particularly the last 2 years of Ukraine-Hungary relations. Budapest was not interested in seeking the solution. Budapest was interested in maintaining the conflict. And comes the question, whom was it good for? Certainly not for the Hungarian minorities here. And there have been several signals from the Hungarian minorities in Ukraine that, guys, please don't do it. There have been actually tensions between Budapest and the Hungarian minorities here because this policy line was harmful also for the Hungarian communities here. And make no mistakes, soldiers belonging to the ethnic Hungarian minority in Ukraine are fighting on the front line, and more than 100 of them have already been killed in defending Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. This community is contributing to Ukraine's defensive fight and will continue contributing. So when you heard things from Budapest, from Viktor Orban, that, oh, we don't even know where Ukraine's borders are. Really? It's actually in the Hungarian constitution that we bear responsibility to protect the rights and the well-being of all compatriots living abroad. So the policy which harmed Ukraine's European integration, the policy which harmed Ukraine's NATO relations, was actually contradicting even the Hungarian constitution. It was contradicting with the constitutional obligation to protect the rights of all compatriots living abroad. So to answer your initial question, what is the challenge? In one sentence, to rebuild trust. Because since the full-scale war catalyzed things, but catalyzed it for the worse. So now we are starting from a bottom, and that's what we need to start working on. The only good news, and that's hopefully for the next questions, or the good news, that things are really changing in Budapest and changing for the better. Thank you.
Thank you, András. Please keep the mic. But yeah, so now we talk. Yeah, so and I relied and rely on you. Yeah, so and it's not just about spicy Hungarian cuisine, but it's about exactly discussions. And exactly the moment I should clarify what András did, that I also present here so only my personal views and opinions, not any of the official institution I could be affiliated with. Yeah, and I'm telling this not because I'm the moderator, not just to tell something, let's say, wrong or something else, but actually to switch to exactly provoking you all. And right now, please feel free also to add, comment, and actually challenge answers of your colleagues, even if a question is not directly directed to you. But András, one more time, the question, the new question to you. So I spoke recently to one of our common friends, and the Hungarian one, and he said that still after elections, so April 12, it's already few weeks, people are still smiling at the streets, let's say like this. And we really see, so yesterday it was a big celebration, not just official part. Zsolt Hegedűs danced one more time. Yeah, his famous and stylish actually dance. And Peter Magyar, even before he got his official position, declared that he is going to invest more and more in good neighborliness, in relation with each neighbors. And look, let's be honest, it's not something new. It's not something new. Viktor Orban declared for decades, yeah, that he is also a big fan of the good relation with neighbors, of this Central European partnership, sometimes kind of these alignments. So what is the difference? What is the difference?
Thank you. Now it's good. So colleagues, if you have Google, please Google Hungarian minister dancing. Minister Zsolt Hegedűs, he's really good in that. So it's really worth taking a look. Yes, the mood has changed. The mood has changed, but these things take time. Colleagues, 16 years. I mean, when I started this career of mine, I started this career because I wanted to be a young diplomat. I will never be a young diplomat anymore. 16 years is a lot of time. 16 years is more than half a generation. I'm teaching in Budapest. Many of my students never knew any other prime minister than Viktor Orban. So what's happening now in Budapest, first of all, I think it would be kind of helpful to be a bit patient. There has not been a change of government in 16 years. Simply the very technicalities of how you change a government, how you form new ministries, how you set up administration. These bureaucratic processes take time, and the institutional knowledge of how to actually change a government, this knowledge has been used last time 16 years ago. So things do take time. Prime Minister Péter Magyar made his oath yesterday. The parliamentary committees will do the hearings for the ministerial candidates. Tomorrow, the names of the state secretaries, deputy state secretaries will be known only from Tuesday, Wednesday. We will see. So we are really in the beginning of a process. So please give Hungary a bit of time. Simply administratively setting up new structures, it takes time, and personal changes, personal replacements will also require some time to boil out. So to answer your question, after apologizing for 5 minutes, right? The core difference will be that the protection of the rights of the ethnic minorities abroad will not be a tool of something else, helping Russia. So it will not be a tool, but it will be an objective. And as soon as it becomes an objective, something you really negotiate about, and you take out the hidden agenda, which was there for years. See, if we will really negotiate about the very subject itself, and not only with Ukraine, but also with our Slovak colleagues and perhaps other countries as well. So how to actually ensure the European guaranteed rights of ethnic minorities. So as long as the discussion becomes about technicalities, about the pragmatic things which can actually be solved, and not demanding anything impossible like Ukraine modifying its constitution. So as long as impossible demands will be put aside and pragmatic expert discussions will start taking place, this is the way of actually solving problems. Will it be quick? Certainly not. There are grievances on both sides, there are demands on both sides, but once rational discussion can be started without ugly surprises, without really impolite gestures, because several really impolite gestures happened on the Hungarian side, which shouldn't have happened, yet they did. So the very attitude towards protecting minority rights will be different. They will not be tools of something else anymore, but the real objectives. So rational discussion can be started. So that's the short answer.
Okay, thank you. Very optimistic, I should say. In compare to the previous years. Balázs, you could have if you wanna, but right now I wanna ask Oana a question to you, and it is based on what we heard from Romania yesterday. Right now I'm quoting: Europe is a topic that unfortunately divides our society. And it's hard to imagine that these quote, belongs to Nicu Șordan, the president of Romania, who won dramatically presidential elections a year ago, exactly with this very, very strong pro-European agenda, sentiment, and actually he united, I mean, okay, not whole Romania, but maybe even whole, within exactly this agenda. So could you clarify here, or we just take out of the context this quote, or it's a kind of a shift, and maybe new narrative, and how it could influence both Romanian foreign policy and also its stance regionally towards the Europe and towards neighbors?
I can only speculate what the president meant, but corroborating it with a lot of previous statements, I would say, unfortunately, he misspoke, and the intention was actually to say the topic of Europe and of where Romania should position itself in Europe, what kind of a role should we have? Should we be dissociating the EU from the US, or should we be among those that continue to see ourselves as pro-Western in the sense of both pillars, EU and US. But the ultimate objective, I think, has been, and it's a very difficult and challenging one, to try and reach out to the half of society, according to all surveys, that do have sovereigntist, nationalist sympathies in Romania. And I think this is a phenomenon that we are dealing with not just in Romania, but in Europe. It's something that we fear will extend and could extend to Ukraine, especially if the war ends in a way that is perceived as not favorable and not worth all the effort that Ukraine has put into it and the sacrifice. And so I think, Central Eastern Europe in particular has had these challenges before. That's the problematic part of it. That's what we fear. Obviously, this is the case in Western Europe. We all look to the French elections with apprehension. We all look to the rise of AfD in Germany and whatnot. But Central Eastern Europe has always had these ethnic conflicts, these fault lines. So any kind of renewed nationalism within a country's borders risks spilling out and creating effects when it comes to these good neighborly relations. I think when it comes to Romania, while at the same time the president, and he's not the only one, I think just, despite the fact that we have this troublesome pro-European, so-called pro-European, pro-democratic coalition, and it's now, you all know that at this point we only have an interim government. I think that the reason that we see all these political troubles is precisely because there's this very delicate dance between keeping it all together now and not giving access to those who challenge Romania's pro-European orientation to government. And the fear that if this, if these are forces are marginalized in the short run, then in 2008, when we have elections again, they might actually make a sweeping comeback. So it's a very challenging task to try and keep things in balance. And I'm sure this impacts relations between Romania and Ukraine as well, because one of the most popular narratives of the sovereigntist camp since the beginning of the war has been stuff like, which again, we've heard in other places in Europe too. Why are we supporting Ukraine? This risks escalation with Russia. Why are we supporting Ukraine rather than investing in our own citizens? Why are we supporting Ukraine when we believe that Ukraine wouldn't have supported us if we had been in a similar situation because we didn't used to be good neighbors? All sort of other disinformation narratives that Russia circulates throughout the region, and much of this Romanian kind of nationalist spectrum buys into. So it's a very delicate challenge to try not to confront these things in ways that people feel they're not heard, that their ideas are simply rejected offhand, which will only entrench those behaviors, while at the same time preserving not just the good relations with Ukraine and the support and the cooperation, but also the principles and the values that are important internally to Romania. So I think it will require even better bilateral cooperation on the Ukrainian side to understand why sometimes it's hard for Romanian officials to speak out about what kind of support we're giving Ukraine, why sometimes it's hard for them to take perhaps more resolute, concrete steps for reasons of domestic politics, while perhaps still taking them behind closed doors, more quietly, more slowly, as frustrating as it may be. On the Romanian side, I think it also requires really staying away from internalizing these ideas of the far right and mainstreaming them in a way that you cannot tell the difference anymore. And to be honest, I was more sad not to hear anything about Ukraine in yesterday's speech that our president gave, rather than the fact that he made a mistake when he phrased how the debate on Europe divides society. And I openly criticized that because our president mentioned how important Moldova's EU accession is to Romania. But Ukraine's EU accession is vital to Romania, and it is vital to Europe. So I think the absence of Ukraine in the speech actually shows that, again, as high on our agenda as this might be strategically, for Romania, this is still new. Cooperation with Ukraine is still new. It's not something that organically happens at all levels. You ask people and even officials, do you support Ukraine? Yes. But is there enough consistency in our relations? Not yet. And I think there is still room for improvement when it comes to this. And I think it's very important just to be very concrete about also how Central Eastern Europe is changing at a time when Europe itself is changing and is coming up with new formats, minilaterals as we call them, with new ideas about what kind of a player Europe wants to be. And I think it's crucial for Central Eastern Europe not to become peripheral again. And you mentioned how dangerous it would have been to close Ukraine western border, Yevhen. Well, the Black Sea, for instance, is an essential outlet in that sense. For Romania, it's essential as well. There is no possibility of managing the security situation in the Black Sea without Ukraine. And this is something that where we will need to get our act together, because on the one hand, it's vital for Central Eastern Europe, including Ukraine, to be integrated into something bigger, whether it's the EU, whether we're talking different formats of cooperation, precisely so that we don't fall back on our historical tensions. But at the same time, Europe is too busy to occupy itself additionally with sorting out our issues here. So we want a more peaceful Black Sea. We're going to have to be the ones to get that and to push it, and the EU will follow, but it won't lead. Do we want Ukrainian integration into the EU and NATO? Because I don't see how in Europe we could do without. Well, this is something that I think, you know, where Ukraine will need Eastern Europe will need Ukraine precisely to increase the strategic importance of this region. Again, at a time when we are competing in Europe for, you know, what are the priorities with limited resources. So I do believe that all of these circumstances need to be taken into account. As has been said, and the first thing I saw when I crossed the border was a marathon being run. This is a marathon. It is not a sprint. There's no fast track into anything, whatever. And you know, I think after the Hungarian elections, sadly, we will start seeing how many other EU countries were hiding behind Hungary, not actually being very determined to have Ukraine as an EU member and not really knowing how. I think much of it is really not knowing how, not because they're genuinely opposed. So there's not going to be a fast track to anything. It's a marathon. We will need to run it together.
Thank you, Anna. Applause, well deserved. And thank you for explanation first, and thank you for the narrative you presented for the region, for our bilateral relations. And Balázs, right now you, kind of a provocation, but I'm sure that you are going to manage with it. So, elections in Slovakia should be next year, yes?
Will be.
Will be, yes. Robert Fico was already twice to Moscow, but not a single time to Kiev. Yes? At the same time, Robert Fico, despite all these internal games inside the EU in terms of enlargement, etc., few times, and still he declared and still actually insists that Ukraine not just should be in the EU, but this is a strategic national interest of Slovakia. So could you actually explain how all these could be combined, yeah, in one political stance, program, agenda, and is it possible to implement all these as a state policy, Slovak state policy?
Yeah, my country is small, but the politics is complex, as you can see. Exactly, that's the case. Look, I mean, as I try to explain this, and indeed I will try to explain. I'm not sure I will get there, but let me try. So first of all, the Slovak public, perhaps, I think by all the data it shows that, you know, like they are the more kind of closer to Russia, or being pro-Russian in a number of views, very polarized actually. But there is a core element of Slovak society as well as in political traditional history. You know, the closeness of Slovakia as the Slovaks to the Russians as the big brother is going back to the 19th century, even earlier. Now, one of the few things which, though, we don't like to speak about is that the Red Army and the Slovak National Uprising in 1944 was a redemption for Slovakia because the first Slovak state was a fascist state. We were ally of Germany during the Second World War, and this was a redemption for the Slovaks, and it has become a funding meat of Slovakia, and particularly is important for Fico, who is coming, his party is essentially coming from the former Communist Party. Like he founded it after he was essentially left the post-communist party at the left. And so these kind of things are very important for him. But also as a social democrat or somebody coming from the left, his voters are moving to the right. And so this is also an important thing. And if you see, it is the far right, which is kind of presenting a pro-Russian or a more pro-Russian positions when it comes to the war and other things within the European Union. So that is also kind of part of this shift. And third, which, Slovakia has become, simply because we are small, there's also an elite consensus. In the past 30 years, I already mentioned that everybody is focusing on the West and EU integration, that we want to be part of the EU core. And Fico is part of this consensus. So even though we disagree on a number of things, right, because of various political, structural, institutional reasons, that desire as a policy has not changed. And even Fico is essentially part of it. There was a lot of questions to me like, oh, Fico is going to be like Orban. It's like, no way. This is a situational partnership with Orban in a lot of ways, but Fico does not have any European ambition, which Orban had. Orban has moved from being the protection of minorities as a post-World War Hungary founding pillar of foreign policy. Has moved to fight for European power and neglected Hungary is one of the reasons why he lost, I think. Fico doesn't have that. Right? Fico's thing is, secure the EU funds, making sure that Slovakia is in the EU core. Slovakia has the euro, don't forget, for years. Right? And at the same time, these symbolic visits to Moscow is paying to the other side of the society as well as the funding needs for it. And even here, there was a lot of criticism that Fico didn't go to the parade. He also didn't go to the parade last year. So but increasingly, Fico is feeling isolated after the Hungarian elections. I think he just didn't want to change it because that would be an accepting of a defeat. So he went. I think it's also more and more, uncomfortable. The Slovaks will not stay as the last one. So, and also you can see to all the, despite all the shenanigans, the Slovak position has become very pragmatic even after he won. Like all the munitions, which by the way, under the Fico government went up tenfold, is going to Ukraine. Right? Yes, not as a form of aid, right? But on a commercial basis, both by others, Scandinavians, others, Czech initiatives actually. So, but it's going there. And the government obviously, they do not like to talk about it, but they, again, managed to accelerate the munition production tenfold. So, it's complicated, it's whole politics, but, one of the reasons why Slovak politics are so complex is because of a different electoral system from Hungary. In Hungary, the winner takes it all, as we essentially seen. I think the tradition is having constitutional majorities by now. I mean, which was the last election? There was no constitutional majority in Hungary, 2006, right? So, and even before. In Slovakia, because of a very different electoral systems where parties are competing, you have to have a room for compromise because you have to have coalition partners. And this is what Fico is essentially is maneuvering around, partly because if he wouldn't go to Moscow, that would be a far-right benefit. So he has to go there in his calculations. At the same time, he has to secure the EU funds. So this is really a Slovak peacock dance, if you like, because of these various factors and institutional framework.
One more time, thank you for explanation, but please keep the mic. But where's Ukraine in these peacock dance right now?
Well, Ukraine, again, Ukraine is for the Fico government because a lot of voters from Fico is coming from the east. So I was hoping and thinking that while Fico politically criticizing Ukraine and the war and the European response, it will be his interest to provide and pursue a pragmatic policy. And I was very much hoping that essentially now he can utilize the EU funds and accelerate infrastructure projects. This has not been happening to the extent as I expected, simply because first time Fico governs with coalition partners, or not a first time, but he usually better managing the state when he's alone or he's in a dominant position in the government. This time he's not. He has two very difficult coalition partners. One is the Slovak National Party, which is dying out, and it was the biggest critique of Ukraine as well as the government Ukraine policy. And the second is a splinter from his own party, which there's a lot of clashing economic and other interest. So the government performance is arguably one of the worst, if not the worst, ever. He's I think, the 5th time prime minister, or 4 times. Yeah. So just, he's also somebody who is dominating Slovak politics for over 2 decades. So, and this kind of Ukraine is being lost, and this pragmatic management, which I was hoping that he will bring, is being lost in this. Also, the energy relationship is a very big problem for the relationship between the two countries. Don't forget, when he came over and tried to do a reset, then it was a decision not to prolong the transit at all. It was a big hit for Fico, and it was the first clash between Zelensky and Fico. When they did the second reset, Druzhba came. So it is also like how Ukraine is managing this relationship, and I wanted to a little bit add to what Yevhen said. Ukraine and Central Europe relationship has become also neglected from the Ukrainian part. Too much focus, too much. Understandably, a lot of focus to the US, Berlin, and Paris, and Brussels, where the main decisions makers are. But all the roads to these places is going through Central Europe, which often, I think, in Kiev is being neglected. And thanks to Dmytro and a very, very few people like you who has been investing into this, I think, the focus is gradually moving back. I would be advised against if now it would be again being lost because of the Scandinavian, Baltic, as I'm calling them, the Northern Alliance. Because just like Poland never give me part of Scandinavia, no matter how much they pretend, I think Ukraine is also not going to be part of the Baltic states. Neither it should be. I think Ukraine, after this war, is going to be emerging as a regional power, regional factor, and these relationships obviously is going to be not without conflict, but it's possible, not without tensions, but it will be possible to rebuild, or not just rebuild, but essentially put it into a different foundation.
Thank you, Balázs, for this in-depth explanation, and thank you for moving in the end to the north, because the one moment I was thinking to interrupt you, because you almost started to actually repeat my question to Yevhen. Yeah, so Yevhen, so look, let's be honest, yes, so we need to share this responsibility for our relations and for the region. I mean, Central Eastern Europe and Western neighbors were invisible for Ukraine for, the significant part of time of our independence, maybe still to some extent. I heard on my own, pretty often, and still, it's not a complaint already. It's kind of a destiny. So yeah, you Ukrainians geopolitically look only, not mainly, but only on Washington or at Washington, Berlin, Brussels. But what about us? What about us? What about Warsaw? What about Bratislava? What about Budapest, Bucharest, even Vienna? Yeah, so you told us very, I think, precise about resentment from Ukraine perspective regarding neighbors. But what about resentment from our neighbors regarding us, and how we should and could rethink this approach, actually escaping from this dilemma, having among Western neighbors, middle powers, small powers in this geopolitical sense, and behave like a big country, of course not a great power, but still big country, and how it could be managed in this regard.
Well, we're talking about something that's completely new phenomenon for Ukraine. So, the assumption that Ukraine is a power is a new phenomenon for Ukraine, and that's in conditions when we have no ethical framework how to deal with the power that Ukrainian government feels. And my fear is that in many cases there will be temptations of the kid in the candy store, and that's I think as of now relations between Ukraine and Eastern European countries from Central European countries was I'd say kind of Milgram experiment of various kinds, but it's not granted that it's not going to go the other way as well. So I think the way to cope with it is the applying to the foreign policy the main principle of the of Revolution of Dignity that won in Kiev, and I think this is the event that was skipped even by professionals. I mean, the meaning of this revolution was not really grasped. What it says is that there is a defining principle that allows you to cooperate, is unconditional recognition of agency and dignity of the other. And I don't see it in many cases, including the Ukrainian side. One of the political objectives of the war that Ukraine has with Russia is to emerge from this war as a middle power. In realist concept of foreign relations, middle powers have ability to influence, and they have greater agency in international relations. I don't buy the realist perspective. I oppose the realist perspective, but I accept that there are a lot of decisions taken along the realist lines. And this is very clearly seen in case of Georgia and in case of Ukraine. One of the reasons of the Georgian collapse and the Georgian government giving in to the Russian pressure is that Georgia does not have the strategic depth to take on the fight with Russia. Neither do have most of the Central European countries, and they are in a sense shielded by Ukraine. But should that shield give in, that might not be a good continuation of the fight. So what I think we have to tackle is we have to tackle this Milgram experiment. There is no harder task than institutionalizing empathy. Because, you're trying to bring into rules something that is part of the ethical, part of the philosophical, part of the religious discourse. And in that sense, I think the more we actually rely on people, the better we are. And this is why I was stressing about the education. This is about, I'm stressing about the kids, etc. We're going to have our own crisis with this in Ukraine because we have so few children. My fear is that the young votes in future Ukraine will be irrelevant because those will be the old farts that will be deciding the elections. Because looking at the demographics scene of Ukraine, we have a incredibly inverted pyramid, not anywhere close to the extent that this is usually happening. It's a phenomenon, generally European phenomenon, but in Ukraine it's radicalized, and it's radicalized by a number of things, starting from the famine and going through the Second World War, through repressions, through Soviet insecurity, into factors like urbanization that decreases the number of children, and cultural change that's that urbanization, not urbanization. No. I mean, I understand. Yeah, I saw the tick that you had on the face. Yeah. It's but. So this is why I think that the public diplomacy is essential, because once in a while we will probably have the governments that will screw it up, and we have to have the system that can withstand it. So partially this is the Ukrainian solution. We've built a system of backups in our governance that allow us to have accidental presidents without terrible consequences. And we've had a number of those, depending on what political views you share. Maybe even in some cases, some people would argue that majority of them were, that way. But this basically means that we have to enhance. We should not try to put all the resources in one basket. We should actually spread, it across. And the other thing, which I think is important, when the agency is recognized, then it means that whatever integration process we have, it's not only Ukraine joining the EU, it's the EU joining Ukraine as well. And in that sense, and this is something that I don't hear that anywhere. I don't hear that in Copenhagen. I don't hear that in Stockholm. I don't hear that in Warsaw. I don't hear that in Berlin. I don't hear that in anywhere. So if this is an integration, it is key for all the parties that we assume positive sum game scenario as the rule of the game. Because if we have a zero-sum game discussion about integration, that's the right eye conflicting with the kidney, in one body. That's not the way to do it. But unfortunately, this is the way we do it. This started on the European side. This started with the association agreement. And Ambassador Mingarelli, who was very tough on Ukraine with the association agreement, then his destiny flipped and he was sent to Ukraine as EU ambassador to see the consequences of what he's done. But actually, this also is the case on the side of Ukraine. Because when you assume yourself, without even achieving it, assume yourself a middle power, and then you start being arrogant towards everyone else, this is not the way to do it. And Ukraine will come into the solution as a great military power, which means that if Ukraine gets a bad deal from the EU, and Ukraine is getting a bad deal from the EU right now, because we are talking about integrating into the union that does not exist. Ukraine is integrating into the welfare union that can exist only under the umbrella of the security union. So what Ukraine needs is, within these negotiations, that the union transforms into a geopolitical union. If this does not happen, what will happen eventually is Ukraine will take through its political weaponization of its military force, Ukraine will later be changing the deals inside the EU by squeezing them through other means. And this is not the good way. This is not good neighborhood. This is not good governance. This is not, the things that we want. So we have a choice of doing it right. And usually on the institutional level, we fail. We fail in the old democracies. We fail in Central Europe. And so my guess is if we actually put more attention on human development, on human capital, on education, on upbringing, and look into sustainability of not of particular political regimes, but of motivation of the voter, then we probably can return to the original Schuman idea of the European Union, and then the documents that have been written in the 60s and in the 70s will not sound strange from the today's perspective, because you read it and then you think, gee, how naive they were. You know, I wish they would talk to the representatives of the same country, you know, now. And this is what I'm afraid of. Ukraine is incredibly romanticized, idealistic youngster right now. There's no worse case than a disillusioned romantic, because then the cynicism comes. And I don't want, Ukraine is too big and too vital to be a cynic. So this is something that I never want to see. And this is why we have a lot of responsibility of handling with extreme care these relations, because if we don't, then we all fail.
Good line to sum up this brilliant and genuinely intellectual discussion. Not always very optimistic, but what is important, I think, the realistic one. So please applause to my speakers. It's not the end, but I want to make sure that we are going to take questions if we have from the audience. To actually sum up our discussion, so please raise your hand if you have a question and ask. We will take all of them and then we'll do the final round and move to commentators, our brilliant commentators to this panel. So please introduce yourself and ask question. English, Ukrainian, it's up to you. Yeah, Vitaly, please.
Може я? Я перепрошую.
So I'm sorry, I will ask the question in Ukrainian. Or maybe I'm not sorry for that. So let me be a skeptical person, and you can actually oppose me. You know, several days ago, I had a talk with my friend from one of the largest countries of the EU, and he grounded me a little bit, because we claim that Ukraine is now in the focus of attention, that Ukraine is a security partner, is a security guarantor for many European countries. However, he told me, have a look at other countries, have a look at China, have a look at Russia, the US, France, Germany. They all have their own interest in this geopolitical game. And in their rhetorics, they have stopped noticing. They are actually on the way to stopping noticing Ukraine. There are also the countries that are Ukraine's neighbors. And let's say after the election in Hungary, they tend to pay more attention to their internal domestic issues that they have to solve. So I really gave a thorough thinking to this. And the previous speakers and Luboš mentioned this. Probably the role of regional unions has been over-exaggerated, like the Visegrad 4. Is it not pointless to give the second birth to such unions? And maybe Ukraine, that is still in wartime, though we hope to soon reach the post-war period. So is Ukraine going to become a driver? Will it be capable of becoming a driver for such regional alliances and unions? And if yes, then what could be the points we have in common with our
Thank you very
neighboring
much.
countries?
So we have a fan of great power politics and probably Ukraine as a potential great power. Do we have any questions? Yeah, please, Mariana, and yeah, here. Pablo, yes, Pablo, but Mariana first, sorry.
Thank you very much for this.
If I may, sorry to interrupt you, very short, very precise, and then we will move on. Yeah,
Okay,
Pablo.
I will try. Thank you anyway for this very insightful discussion. And my question about the Bucharest 9 format, which we are expecting to be held next week. and what the role it will have after the election in Hungary, and do you expect in Romania, and do you expect in Hungary that this format can be seen as the more just the security consolidation mechanism in Eastern Central Europe? Thank you.
Okay, nice. Pavlo? Okay, one more. Tak.
My question is for foreign colleagues, and I'm still a military officer in the armed forces. So my message is clear. It's about existential threat to all of us. And its existential issue is security. Because without security, there is no prosperity, no investment, no good neighboring, nothing, no Europe. So my question is can security problem reunite the European Union again and make it a strong geopolitical power? Because you see, in America's interest and Russia's interest and China's interest to demolish European Union as a power. But as we see, the only shield Europe has is Ukrainian army. Baltic states understand it very clearly, but your neighbor countries, we have some sort of they don't understand the societies that this is a really existential threat to them. And the Ukrainian army is the only shield they have. Because let me be clear, your armies are not equal with Russian one, but the Ukrainians are still fighting. So there's still hope for prosperity and for a greater future.
Thank you very much. One more question, Vasily Ivancho, please. And then we will go to my speakers.
Доброго дня, Матвей.
Good afternoon. So I've got two questions, if I may. So the first question is for the representative of Hungary and for the representative of Romania. We all know that, well, and probably we don't have the representative of Poland, but I would address this question also to a representative of Poland. So we know that the largest recipients of money from the EU actually are those countries. If we take the budget allocated in per capita, if we speak about precautions and concerns, I would say that it is these countries that mainly voice those concerns and precautions. So my question is as follows. If we have any delays with the accession of Ukraine to the EU, could it become an issue of in the interests of those countries? Because the forecast is that after Ukraine's accession to the EU, Ukraine will be getting the highest amount of money from the EU budget. So can it be the case that financial interests of those countries will prevail over political interests? And the second question, since we have Varos here and we also always improvise, so I would like to ask whether the neighboring countries of Ukraine, in particular post-Soviet countries, do they have the understanding that today their interests have changed? Maybe it is right what we had after World War II. It already happened once. Then they were sacrificed for the sake of some other influences. I mean the agreement between the US and Russia.
Thank you very much. So we took all questions. Unfortunately, we could not take more. If we can, in really blitz format right now, to sum up, and Oana, please, you will be the first. So just few, let's say 3 as a maximum takeaways from our discussions and answering to all these 5 questions very, very, very shortly.
I will try to definitely. On the EU as a defense player and regional formats. One, security is uniting Europe. It is uniting Europe not just in security. If you look at the Enrico Letta reports explaining how the only way for Europe to be a truly geopolitical actor is to have a single a genuine, completed single market, capital market. So to leverage the fact that only together we are indeed a very significant economy, and obviously hence geopolitical power, you will understand that this is already creating a very strong current of unity in Europe. And this is to a large extent Ukraine's contribution. Ukraine is also transforming the EU in terms of enlargement. I do believe that the kind of EU that we now have will no longer be the EU we have 5 years from now. We will not have the same financial mechanisms. We will not have the same policy mechanisms, and all of that because of Ukraine and its size and its importance. So I think those who raise objections now to integrating Ukraine in Europe based on how it would disturb the current mechanisms fail to see that these mechanisms are dying as we speak right now. So the important thing is the projection of what the EU will look like 5 years from now with Ukraine. Will Ukraine have the same standing as, I don't know, Czechia today? I don't know. I don't think that's guaranteed. I think the way that Ukraine can affect the common agricultural policy and so on and so forth, will remain a very crucial issue. But we will definitely together need to find a way to meaningfully integrate Ukraine in Europe in ways that really builds added capacity for Europe, not just for Ukraine. And I'm happy to say that 3 days ago in Yerevan, I did hear President Macron say for the first time, with regard to Armenia, but I think it very much applies to Ukraine as well, that enlargement is in the interest of the EU as much as it is in the interest of the accession countries. I have been waiting a long time to hear that, because unless the EU has a buy-in in enlargement and doesn't see it as charity, it's not going to happen. And I will close by saying that regional formats in that sense, I think are very useful. And I would oppose the creation of any sort of V4 plus, whether it's plus Ukraine or plus anything. This is going back and this is limiting. B9, for instance, that we're hosting next week in Bucharest and where President Zelensky, I believe, is participating, has guests from the Nordic countries, has President Zelensky as a guest, because it is already evolving into something more than a consolidation of security cooperation. It will primarily remain that, because it wouldn't be smart to dilute these formats by giving them 10 different tasks. But at the same time, just as security is indeed transforming Europe, the same is happening within the Bucharest 9 format. I would say what we need with the Nordic Baltic 8, with anything else, is the kind of flexible formats in which sometimes we come together only the eastern flank, sometimes we come together with Central Europe, sometimes with the Nordics, where the way it makes sense, because if we are to be more agile, if we are to act faster and better, then we cannot always do this as 27 plus partners. We have to do this in smaller formats, and I think Ukraine can play a very important role. This will not be a problem, by the way, in terms of military expenditure. I mean, for God's sake, the last worry that we all have is that Ukraine is going to get more money. Ukraine is already part of the safe funding of the European Union. And the reason is, what's more important to us than the money is the forces and the equipment. That's what we don't have. So Ukraine can bring a contribution. It's not going to be a consumer. That said, let me thank you for organizing this panel. Thank you for being here. And primarily, thank you for the service that you all are doing to us Europeans and us, your neighbors, and hope that we can return the same kind of support for a long time to come. Slava Ukraini.
Herojem slava. Thank you, Anna. Balázs. Please do it quick.
Very quickly. That's exactly what I wanted to say. First of all, I agree with Oana that the current Ukraine cannot be a member of the current EU. So what kind of Ukraine and what kind of EU will emerge from the war is going to be a key question. How the war ends is another key question. We can guess. I don't want to get there. It's just currently, this is not possible. That's why, for example, rapid integration is not possible, simply because it's just wouldn't be possible institutionally and a number of other issues. Financially as well, but again, Oana already said it's going to change as well. It's already changing simply because Ukraine's biggest contribution is going to be in defense, which is just emerging. Number two, the threat perception. And this is one of the long kind of emotional topics which I usually have with my Ukrainian friends as well. Threat perception of Central Europe is going to be always different from the Baltics. Not even mentioning Spain. Let's not go to Spain, just in Central Europe, for various reasons, even because of the Carpathian, right? The mountains, which is also not only the Ukrainian army, but the mountains and protects us. Second in this topic is that it's the Ukrainian success, which is also keeping Central Europe threat perception low. The frontier is really far away. Right? You can feel it in Lviv as well, not only in Košice or in Bratislava, by the way. So that is also, and number three here, what you see, the defense and everything else, I think we also have a big transatlantic issue here, which is like all the real European money and funding was starting not after into defense, was not start after the Russian full-scale invasion, but after Donald Trump has become American president, right? So what is the threat perception? I think for a lot of Europeans, particularly in the Western part, they're afraid still more from Donald Trump and its disruption, NATO and all this, than from the Russian perception. So the Russian threat. On that, I think it's one of the best source of what exactly the Europeans think about Russia is Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski's speech at the Polish Sejm, the parliament, 2-3 months ago, when he essentially said we need to keep pressuring Russia, not because they're strong, but because they're weak. And my last point, what I would like to see, we can't, Slovakia, I think also Hungary, we can't compete when it comes to Poland and Romania's geographical, military, all this contribution, which is largely shored up by the US, by the way. This is the US-Romania, US-Poland relationship, which is also key in terms of NATO. What we can do much more is the humanitarian, people-to-people, and all this, and I'm particularly unhappy that this is not happening. Very Slovakia in Zakarpattia, nowhere, right? If you cross the border, you see USAID from Slovakia and from Hungary too. It's a shame. Right? It should be actually our, presence here in these regions particularly should be much higher. The money we spend should be much higher. We shouldn't rely on costs and USAID, no USAID any longer, to do this, but it should be actually our presence and our interest. And I'm particularly unhappy that it's not happening, and I hope I can contribute to this, that it be happening more. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Balázs. Yevhen, as short as possible.
Well, I would try not to get in the trap of thinking that everything great has already been created. So I think there are possible future unions that are absolutely strange and non-existent now. I can envision Eastern Intermarium with Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltics. I can envision, other potential formats. Let's try it. Let's try them in different segments, in different ways. I think this is all important. There's one thing that I wanted to say was I completely agree that about modern Ukraine and modern EU and the difficulty of integration. But there's one takeaway from the history of Ukraine that I think is extremely important. Many MPs who came to work to the Parliament building on the August 24th, 1991, had no idea that they will be voting independence that day. Yeah. And they knew that they will have to take some important decisions. But I think the window of opportunity for Ukraine's independence on that day was probably one day long. we would have had positive voting for independence the day before or the day after. But we had 346 votes for and only 1 vote against. And imagine if you have 312 votes for and 35 against. That's a bad, bad situation, especially if you have weak security institutions, etc. So the thing that I want to emphasize is that there's a sense of history. And I am not sure if technocrats have the feeling of history. So in some cases, I think it's important that we make a leap of faith. And if we understand that the union is so strategically vital for us, that we commit to each other, and then we sort things out. And I'm afraid that in a worst case scenario, if we don't do it now, what might happen, and you know, I'm just as skeptical about many things as many people in this audience, that there will be no union to rescue. I am frightened every time I see the polling from Germany, France, and many other countries. And I understand that if we do it wrong, we might actually speed up this process of breaking the union. Remember that the British voters who voted themselves out of the EU will have to live with the consequences of that, even if they have remorse. And this chance is also possible.
They do. András, please sum up. And our commentators, please take mics because you are next.
Thank you, Dmytro. So just in short, to Pavlov's question about whether Europe whether the security threat can unite Europe and make Europe to be a real player, it is already happening. So the answer is yes. But as usual, it's yes, but we need time. We are not yet ready. It will take, even if you take at the most optimistic readiness plans, it will take 4 or 5 years at least. In reality, it's even more. So everybody who is in decision-making position understands the importance of helping Ukraine stay in the fight. Everybody understands in the defense sphere that Ukraine is the shield and Ukraine is buying us time, and Ukraine, as Oana said, Ukraine is a contributor. And you all know the funny stories of Ukrainian drone units participating in NATO exercises and defeating everybody by and large. People understand that Europe and European armed forces need a lot to learn from Ukraine. So as Oana said very elegantly, Ukraine will be and is a contributor to European security, and people with decision-making power understand it. Good news, it will stay like that. And to Vasil's question about the financial implications, I always ask how much Europe has spent so far on supporting Ukraine in the last 4 years. Everything combined, money paid, money committed. Altogether, the answer is 390 billion euros in 4 years' time. 390 in 4 years' time, meaning something like 95 billion per year. Is it big money or small money? It will be big money on my bank account, of course. But if we take, in European comparison, 95 billion for Ukraine per year, do you know the size of the EU's combined GDP? 30,000 billion. Money we have. Money we have, and the good news, the political will is also available. You can look at the Eurobarometer surveys, European Union Statistical Survey, measuring to what extent the European population is in favor of continuing the support for Ukraine. And decisive majority is in favor and will be in favor. Ever since the beginning of the full-scale war, there is a minor decrease in the support, but in all key questions, absolute majority of Europeans still are in favor of supporting Ukraine. So the money will be available. Recently demonstrated by the 90 billion loan. The 90 billion loan was organized and agreed upon fairly quickly. Yes, Viktor Orban vetoed it, but now it's over, so the money can keep coming, because we understand And I cannot emphasize it strong enough. As long as for us it costs only money, it's just good. Because Ukraine is paying a much higher price than money. And everybody in the decision-making structures understand it, that money we have. So I'm fairly optimistic regarding the sustainability of the support. Will we have debates? Sure, but support will keep coming.
Thank you very much. So, Ábel and Csilla, please tell us something very optimistic. Who's next? Who's first? Csilla, you.
Ja, persze.
Tak. Ale szybko.
I'll be quick. I would like to welcome all of you. I was a bit surprised that I'm a commentator here, but I want to do it, and probably I will even disappoint you, because I won't be very optimistic. If we are optimistic, we won't do anything. There are three issues I would like to address. First of all, sooner or later, the issue will be raised how we can discuss certain issues. For example, how we discuss the minority rights with Hungary. From historical perspective, on the basis of Hungarian-Ukrainian fundamental agreement, there was a commission, Hungarian-Ukrainian Commission on National Minorities, which worked till 2011. Since that time, it has not been functioning, but legally it is still in place. In 2017, there were different commissions on education for Transcaucasian Hungarians. There were 4 commissions, and every commission started something new, saying that they are innovative and so on. What is important? These commissions were more or less open, and they have been providing some information. At the beginning of 2024, those 11 points were introduced that were state secrecy. And if there are certain problematic issues there, why can't we talk openly about them? Why can't we review them and discuss them in open public? It is understandable that the Hungarian government is not very much interested whether these issues would be addressed or not. Moreover, it happened after December 2023, when the main law on national minorities was changed in the Hungarian legislation. After that time, well, it is ridiculous to discuss such issues. In Hungary, it was understandable that Hungarian schools were not closed and children study and are taught in the Hungarian language. And the Hungarian community was actually somehow silent about all those issues. The second point, you were talking about V4 format. I think that Visegrad 4 as such does not exist, and I do not see lots of sense in restoring this V4 format. Because, well, we have North Atlantic Alliance, and actually Poland more belongs to that alliance. And we are talking about a different format and different relationship and different historical memory. So probably we have to expand it to the neighbors and to the neighbors of Ukraine. I just wonder why Romania is not there. On the issue of minorities will not be given the rights which, for example, are given to some national minorities and are not given to others. For example, why are we talking separately about Hungarian minorities and why separately with the Romania about Romanian minority? Why can't we discuss all these issues together? The third point, I do not want to disappoint you, but elections has always been there, they will be there, and every time this is something risky, but this is democracy, so you cannot do anything about it here. So the Hungarians say +1. This is just to improve the mood. And we do not have any other future. It will always be like this. Thank you very much, Sheila.
And a kind of a summary or input for the next panel as well.
Yeah, I mean, hi. I'll keep my best content for the next panel. Of course, I won't spend it on yours, but I'm also helplessly outmatched by the quality of the panel. So thank you very much for the discussion. And you talked a lot about the big things, like, you know, regional development and foreign policy and even geopolitics. And I just really don't understand big things. I sometimes do understand small things, and I want to talk about two small things. And the first one is, and I did not hear you talk a whole lot about this, is that it's really difficult to hate babies and mothers with babies and, you know, young families and refugees. It's just really, really difficult to do that. I mean, some people can do that, but most of them can't. And this is the image that neighboring countries are getting of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, other than what you get from the news of the army fight and all that. And whatever type of narrative about Ukraine as this evil and corrupt country that is going to eat us up is just subsumed into this daily communication with regular people who have their own problems and, you know, their own issues living in these countries. So the image of Ukrainians and Ukraine is changing this so quickly in the neighboring countries. I live in Bratislava. You know, it's not like I haven't seen a Ukrainian before. I also travel a lot. But for many people, just coming into contact with the citizens of these countries, fundamentally changing their perspective from, you know, the mafiosi in the big cars who cannot drive and, you know, the people who are rude and all that, to just regular people who are your neighbors. And that is just building the bridges that can, you know, somehow be used in the future to connect these countries. That's the first small thing I wanted to talk about, which is huge, actually. And the second thing I wanted to talk about, and I did hear you talk about just a little bit, is how the Hungarian election campaign showed that what seemed to be a super important issue, which is, you know, hating Ukrainians and trying to push the agenda of war and fear of war towards the population of these countries is just not working as much as some people believed and maybe hoped. And this is going to vastly influence the narrative of the other neighboring countries as well, mostly or maybe including Slovakia, right? So I think that Slovak political parties were looking at the Hungarian elections keenly and see if this kind of narrative would work. It did not. I mean, that's not the only reason why the Hungarian elections ended as they did, but it's certainly a great motivation for Slovak parties, or maybe also Polish parties, Romanian parties, and all those to change their narratives as well, which again can lead to a better neighborhood policy. So these are two, I think, objective facts that can, you know, enhance the quality of cooperation and the neighborhood policy that we're looking at. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you, speakers. Thank you, commentator. Thank you, audience, for good questions.